The boot was already in the air. Ezra Bout didn't close his eyes. He had learned a long time ago that flinching made it worse. So he stayed curled on the wet asphalt, both arms wrapped tight around his stomach, jaw locked, breathing through his nose in slow, controlled pulls. Not for himself. He stopped caring about himself months ago. But the pup needed every second he could buy. "You deaf?" The voice above him was almost cheerful. "We asked you a question." Ezra said nothing. The second enforcer laughed. A flat, ugly sound that bounced off the alley walls like something hollow. 3 of them. Hollow Fong soldiers from the ink on their wrists. He had recognized the brand the moment they cornered him behind the warehouse row on Delacroix Street. He had nowhere to run. He hadn't been able to run properly in weeks. Even carrying a pup, you're still worthless. The boot came down, then stopped. Not because of mercy. Not because anyone changed their mind. It stopped because the temperature in the alley changed. That was the only way Ezra could describe it later. 1 second, the air was hot and mean and closing in. The next second, it dropped. Like something large and certain had walked into the space and rearranged everything without touching a single wall. Hi viewers. If someone you once helped as a child showed up broken on the street years later, would you still recognize them? Drop your answer below. The 3 soldiers turned slowly. Ezra turned too. Standing at the mouth of the alley, hands in his pockets, was a man Ezra had never seen before, and somehow already knew. Tall, dark suit, no tie. The kind of stillness that didn't come from calm. It came from never needing to prove anything. The soldiers clearly recognized him before Ezra did. He watched their shoulders drop. Watched one of them take a half step back without realizing it. The man didn't raise his voice. He said 4 words. "Whose street is this?" Nobody answered. The silence answered for them. Ezra's vision was starting to blur at the edges. Blood pressure, exhaustion, the particular darkness that comes from too many days without enough food. But he kept his eyes on the man at the alley entrance. Kept watching his face. Because something about the line of his jaw, the way he held his head slightly to the left when he was thinking, no, that wasn't possible. People from that part of his life didn't end up here. They didn't end up in expensive suits with soldiers who went pale at the sight of them. They ended up scattered, forgotten, like Ezra himself. The man's eyes moved from the soldiers to the ground, to Ezra, and they stopped. Not the way a powerful man looks at a problem to be handled. The way someone looks at something they lost and never expected to find. The soldiers were still frozen. Nobody in the city moved when Kalen Rourke was deciding something. That much even Ezra had heard. Ghost stories passed between shelter beds. The Black Crest boss who built his empire on silence and precision. The Alpha who had never once lost a territory negotiation because he never negotiated from fear. Kalen Rourke was staring at him like he had forgotten how to breathe. Ezra opened his mouth. He didn't know what he planned to say. Something small. Something that would end this without more trouble, without anyone else getting caught in whatever orbit he carried now, because everyone who got close to him got pulled under eventually. What came out instead was a whisper. 2 words. The nickname he had given a frightened 15-year-old boy on a stormy night inside a shelter infirmary. A name that had never belonged to anyone else. Kalen's entire body went still. Not the controlled stillness from before. Something different. Something that looked, for just 1 second, like breaking. Kalen moved before he made a decision. That was the part his Captain Demarion West would later say didn't make sense. Kalen Rourke always decided first. Always calculated the angle, the cost, the exposure. He had built the Black Crest Syndicate on that discipline, not on instinct and definitely not on feeling. But his feet were already crossing the alley before his mind caught up. He crouched down. Eye level with the Omega on the ground. Up close, the damage was worse. Split lip. Bruising along the left cheekbone still fresh enough to be rising. And the stomach, full, round, heavy with a pup that had to be close to term. Kalen's chest did something uncomfortable that he didn't have a name for. "Don't touch me." The Omega's voice was cracked but firm. "I'm fine. You're not fine. I've been worse." Somehow that landed harder than anything else he could have said. Kalen looked at his face again. Really looked. Underneath the dirt and the bruising and the years that had clearly not been kind, the bone structure was the same. The amber eyes were the same. The particular way he lifted his chin when he was scared but refusing to show it. Ezra bowed. Kalen had spent 11 years wondering what happened to the quiet Omega boy from the Treem Street shelter, who had wrapped his cracked ribs with torn bedsheets, and never once asked why a strange alpha boy was hiding in the infirmary supply room during a thunderstorm. He had left before morning. He hadn't even learned the boy's last name. But the name Ezra gave him that night, Stubborn Wolf, said with a small, exhausted smile, like it was obvious. Kalen stood and turned to the 3 hollow Fang soldiers, who had not moved. Wise decision. You have 60 seconds to clear this block. He didn't look at them when he said it. After that, I stopped being interested in whether you make it out of the district. They left in 30. He turned back to Ezra, who was trying to stand on his own and doing a poor job of it. Kalen didn't offer his hand. He had already learned in the past 30 seconds that Ezra would refuse help if it looked like pity. So instead he simply positioned himself close enough to catch him if he went down. Ezra made it upright, swayed once, didn't fall. I don't need a safe house, Ezra said, like he already knew what was coming. I didn't offer one. You were about to. Kalen said nothing. He reached inside his jacket and pulled it off. Black wool, dry cleaned that morning, worth more than most people's monthly rent, and set it across Ezra's shoulders without asking. Ezra looked down at it, then back up. Something moved across his face, too fast to name, but it looked, for just a second, like grief. You always ran cold, Kalen said quietly. Even in summer. Ezra's breath caught, because that was not something a stranger would know. The safe house on Beaumont Street had never seen anything like this. Demarian stood in the hallway outside the guest room with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, watching 2 of Kalen's private physicians disappear through the door with their bags. He had been Kalen's right hand for 6 years. He had seen the boss make cold calls that ended careers, watched him sit across from men who were begging for their lives without blinking once. He had never seen him sit in a chair outside a closed door for 40 minutes without speaking. Boss. Demarian kept his voice low. The hollow Fang soldiers you clocked in the alley. Their captain is going to want an explanation. Let him want one. Kalen. Demarian took 1 step closer. We don't have a clean answer for why a rival family's men got bounced off a block for roughing up a civilian. If word gets around that you pulled soldiers off a job over one Omega who is 8 months pregnant and was left bleeding on asphalt. Kalen's voice didn't rise. Flattened. Which was worse. Finish that sentence carefully. Demarian closed his mouth. Inside the room, Ezra had refused the 4 twice. The doctor, a steady woman named Philippa who had patched up Black Crest soldiers for 4 years without flinching, finally pulled a chair to his bedside and folded her hands on her knee. Nobody is going to force you, she said. But that pup is taking everything you have right now. Your iron is critically low. Your blood pressure is sitting at a number that concerns me. I need you to let me help. Not for your sake if that's easier. For the baby. Ezra stared at the ceiling. A long pause. Then he rolled up his sleeve. When Philippa came out, she spoke to Kalen in the hallway. Low. Direct. He's malnourished. The bruising is consistent with repeated physical trauma over weeks. Not just today. The pup is viable but stressed. She paused. He needs rest, nutrition, and 0 additional stress. Whatever is chasing him, keep it away. Kalen nodded once. Demarian watched his boss walk back to the chair beside the closed door and sit down again. No phone, no paperwork, just sitting. You know him, Demarian said. It wasn't a question anymore. Kalen didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Inside the room, Ezra lay flat and stared at the 4 line in his arm and tried to remember the last time someone had done something for him without immediately presenting a bill. Not a money bill. The other kind. The kind that showed up later. Favors. Leverage. Silence in exchange for something. Kindness had a price. He had learned that the way most people learn things that matter, too late and at a cost he was still paying. But Kalen had just sat down outside his door. Not asking questions. Not making promises. Just present. That was almost scarier than the alternative. Through the wall, Ezra heard Demarian's voice drop to urgent and low. Heard the word war used once. His stomach tightened. He was already a problem. He was always already a problem. It started with a cup of soup. Not a conversation. Not an explanation. Just Kalen coming through the door the next morning with a bowl of something warm and setting it on the bedside table without comment. He pulled the chair close, not too close, and sat down. Opened his phone. Looked at it like a man with things to review. Ezra watched him from the pillow. "You're going to sit there?" Ezra asked. "Apparently. You're not going to ask me anything?" Kalen looked up briefly. "Eat first." It was such a simple thing. Such a completely ordinary thing. Ezra ate. The soup was good real broth, not the watered-down kind, with soft vegetables and something that tasted like it had been made by someone who actually knew how. He didn't ask where it came from. He finished most of it before either of them spoke again. "My name is Ezra," he said finally. Like a test. "I know. You knew before I told you." Kalen set down his phone. "Yes." Silence. Then Ezra said, "I had a place. 3 years ago. A real one. Apartment over on Marchand Avenue. Steady work doing medical billing for a clinic off Josephine Street." He paused. "That's gone now." Kalen said nothing. Waited. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Ezra's voice stayed flat. "Practiced. A transaction. At the clinic. After hours. I didn't even understand what I was looking at. Not completely. But whoever was in that room understood that I'd seen it." He looked at the 4-line. "Within 2 weeks, my employment record showed a theft charge that never happened. My lease got pulled. References disappeared." He exhaled slowly. "I tried to fight it. Couldn't find anything to grab onto. Like trying to argue with a wall that keeps moving." Kalen was very still. "I've been moving since," Ezra said. "Shelter to shelter. Some nights not even that." A long pause. "The pup's father?" Kalen asked. Carefully. "Gone." Ezra didn't explain further. The word had a door behind it, locked from the inside, and Kalen did not push it. That night, after Ezra was asleep, Kalen sat in his office downstairs and pulled every document connected to a theft charge filed at a medical clinic on Josephine Street in the last 4 years. Took his team 40 minutes. What they found took his breath. The charge existed. Filed cleanly. Processed correctly through the system. Employer verified. Reference confirmed. Case closed without prosecution. The kind of outcome that looks merciful on the surface but functions as a permanent mark. But the dates didn't line up. The incident report was filed 6 days before the date Ezra said he witnessed anything. Kalen stared at that number for a long time. Someone had prepared the paperwork before Ezra even became a problem. Which meant someone had been watching. Waiting. Building a trap around a man who didn't know he was inside one yet. Kalen set the file down slowly. This was not a warning. This was not a cleanup job. This was surgical. This was planned. And it had been running for years. Kalen told Ezra nothing. That was a choice. Not a comfortable one, but a deliberate one. Because the moment Ezra understood the full scope of what was built against him, he would run. Kalen had known him for less than 72 hours in this life, and already he understood that about him. Ezra Bout did not wait to become someone else's casualty. He moved. He disappeared. He made himself small enough to slip through whatever net was closing. That instinct had kept him alive. It would also get him killed if he ran now. So Kalen kept the investigation quiet and kept his face neutral every time he sat in that chair beside the bed. He brought food. He answered the questions Ezra asked. He did not volunteer the ones Ezra hadn't thought to ask yet. Meanwhile, the picture his team was assembling was getting ugly fast. The clinic on Josephine Street was a front. Not the whole building, just one office in the back, rotating staff, payments processed through 3 different shell companies before landing clean. The transaction Ezra witnessed had moved product worth enough that the people involved would have considered eliminating a witness a reasonable operating cost. But they hadn't eliminated him. They had erased him instead. More thorough, less messy, and it left no body to explain. Kalen's investigator, a precise and unreadable woman named Solange Thibodeau, spread physical copies across the conference table on the 2nd floor and walked him through it in 40 minutes. Whoever architected this, Solange said, had access to the city employment database, 2 district court clerks, and at minimum 1 supervisor inside the housing authority. She tapped the corner of a document. This isn't one organization. This is cooperation between at least 3. Names, Kalen said. Working on the top. But I have the middle layer. She slid a page forward. One name keeps appearing as a connector. Someone who moves between the Holofong operation and a private firm that does city contract work. She paused. Boss, if we pull that thread, we're not looking at a turf dispute. We're looking at something that goes into City Hall. Kalen looked at the page, said nothing for a long time. Then, downstairs, a door opened and closed. He was moving before Solange finished her sentence. Down the hall, down the stairs. The guest room was empty, bed neatly made. Ezra had done that himself, even in his condition, which said everything about who he was. On the pillow was a folded piece of paper. For lines. You've been too good to me for this to be simple. I know what it costs when people get near me. Thank you for the soup. I'm sorry. Kalen stood there for one full second. Then he walked to the security desk in the front room where his overnight man, a quiet soldier named Tremaine, was already pulling up the camera feeds without being asked. Exterior camera. West side exit. Timestamp. 4:17 in the morning. Ezra, moving slow, one arm across his stomach, turning left onto the street, disappearing into the dark. And behind him, on the camera covering the far end of the block, 2 figures. Hoods up, keeping distance, following. Kalen's voice came out completely level. Find him. The contraction hit without warning. Ezra stopped walking. Both hands went to his stomach. He pressed against the nearest wall. Cold brick, wet from whatever had rained through the night, and breathed through it the way Philippa had shown him. In through the nose. Out slow. Don't tighten. Don't fight it. Past. He kept moving. Delacroix Street was empty at this hour. For 40-something in the morning. That particular darkness that isn't night anymore but hasn't decided to be day yet. Every shelter he knew in this district had a 6 p.m. cutoff. He wasn't going to a shelter anyway. Shelters had intake forms. Intake forms had names. His name was currently attached to a theft charge that made every system he touched turn cold. He turned onto a side street. Didn't look back. That was the mistake. If he had looked back just once, he would have seen the 2 figures maintain his pace from half a block behind. Hoods up, hands in pockets. Moving the way people move when they've done this before and don't need to rush because they already know where it ends. Ezra didn't look back. He was focused on the next step. Then the next. An abandoned textile building 3 blocks east had a loading dock with a broken side panel he'd used twice before. Dry inside. No foot traffic. Far enough from Holofong territory that he'd felt safe there. Relatively. The word safe had stopped meaning much to him a long time ago. Another contraction. Harder this time. He stopped again, one hand flat on the wall, one arm across his stomach. Too close together. He counted the seconds. 22 seconds. That was wrong. That was too close. Not yet. He wasn't ready. The pup wasn't supposed to come yet. He started moving again anyway. The loading dock was another block and a half. He could make it. He had made worse distances in worse condition. He told himself that twice. The third contraction dropped him to one knee. This one didn't pass quickly. It built, held, a pressure that started in his lower back and wrapped around the front of him like something tightening from the inside. He bit down on the sound that tried to come out of his throat. Not because of pride. Because the 2 men behind him were now 30 feet away and closing, and he had just figured out they were there. He heard the footsteps change rhythm. They weren't hiding anymore. Ezra pressed his back to the wall and turned to face them. Both hands still on his stomach. Legs unsteady. The alley behind him was a dead end. He hadn't checked before he turned. That was the exhaustion. Exhaustion made you stop checking. The taller of the 2 men reached into his jacket. Then stopped. Because behind them, at the mouth of the alley, 3 sets of headlights cut through the dark simultaneously. Doors opened. Kalen Rourke stepped out of the middle vehicle. He didn't run. He walked. Steady. Unhurried. Like a man who had already decided how this ended and was simply covering the distance between the decision and the moment. The 2 men looked at each other. Made a fast calculation. Ran. Kalen let them go. He was already crouching in front of Ezra, one hand hovering. Not touching, not yet. Close enough to catch. His eyes moved fast. Checking. The way someone checks when they're terrified but cannot afford to look it. Ezra looked up at him. "I told you not to follow me," Ezra said, voice tight from the pain. "You did," Kalen said. Another contraction. This time Ezra couldn't hold the sound. Kalen's hand landed on his back. Steady. Warm. Not pulling. Not pushing. Just there. "Okay," Kalen said quietly. "Okay. I've got you." Those 3 words. Ezra had not heard 3 words like that in so long he didn't know what to do with them. So he did the only thing left. He stopped fighting. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let someone else hold the weight. Philippa was already on the phone. The car was already moving. The pup came at 6:14 in the morning. Small. Loud. Furious about being in the world. Which, Philippa said quietly, was a very good sign. Ezra lay back against the pillow and held the baby against his chest and didn't speak for a long time. The room was warm. Someone had turned the lamp low. Outside the window, the city was starting its morning noise, the kind of ordinary sound that keeps going regardless of what happens inside any particular building, and there was something almost brutal about how normal it all sounded. Kalen stood near the door. He had not been asked to stay. He had also not been asked to leave. So he stayed, the way he had learned to do things with Ezra. Quietly, without pressing for permission, close enough to matter and far enough to give room. The pup made a small, irritated sound. Ezra exhaled. And for the first time since the alley on Delacroix Street, the tension left his face completely. Just for a few seconds. Just long enough to see who he actually was underneath all of it. The wariness, the bracing, the constant low-level calculation of exits. Kalen saw it. Filed it away. Said nothing. Demarian arrived an hour later with an update that could not wait. He pulled Kalen into the hallway and spoke low and fast. "The 2 men from the alley. We picked them up." Pause. "They're not Hollow Fong." Kalen went still. "Who?" "Contract. Hired through a private security firm, Vantage Group." Which is interesting because Vantage Group does about 60% of its business with the city. Demarian looked at him steadily. The contract was issued 18 months ago. Standing order. The target was flagged as a flight risk. 18 months. Ezra had been on someone's active list for 18 months. Kalen turned and looked through the narrow window in the door at Ezra, who was still holding the pup, still looking at that small face like it was the only thing in the room that made complete sense. "The man who issued the contract," Kalen said. "Aldous Greer." Demarian said the name carefully. "Deputy Director of City Infrastructure. Also the silent financial backer behind 2 of the shell companies in Solange's report." Aldous Greer. Kalen knew the name. Knew the face. A careful, polished man who showed up at city functions and shook hands and smiled at cameras, and had been quietly routing public contract money into Hollow Fong operations for at least 7 years. A man protected by layers of distance and paperwork and other people's names on documents he authored. One of the captured contractors had given them that name. Freely. Quickly. The way people give names when they understand the alternative. Kalen walked back into the room. Pulled the chair to Ezra's bedside. Sat down. Ezra looked at him sideways. "You have that face." "What face?" "The one where you know something and you're deciding whether to say it." "A beat." "His name is Aldous Greer," Kalen said. Ezra stopped breathing for a second. Just one. Then quietly. So quietly the pup didn't stir. He said, "I know that name." Ezra had known since the clinic. That was the part he hadn't said out loud. Not to Kalen. Not to anyone. Because knowing a name like Aldous Greer's, a man with city contracts and quiet money and the kind of reach that could erase a person's entire paper existence in under 2 weeks, was not useful information. It was a weight. Knowing it and being a homeless pregnant Omega with no resources, no allies, and no standing meant the name was just one more thing that could get him killed if the wrong person heard him say it out loud. So he hadn't. He set the pup down gently in the bassinet Philippa had brought in and turned to face Kalen properly for the first time since they'd been in this room together. "I saw him," Ezra said, "at the clinic. That night. He was in the back office with 2 other men and a transfer ledger that didn't match any city account I'd processed in 3 years of that job. I didn't know who he was then. But the man he was meeting called him by name." He paused. "I looked him up the next morning. Understood what I'd seen. and started quietly making copies of the ledger files I had access to. Kalen looked at him, said nothing, waited. I hid them, Ezra said, before everything fell apart, before the charge appeared. I knew it was coming, not the specifics, but I knew. And I hid the copies somewhere I could reach them if I ever had a reason to. Pause on that. 18 months on the street. 8 months pregnant. Running, hiding, surviving on shelter food and city charity, and whatever odd jobs a visibly pregnant Omega could find before being turned away at the door. And the entire time, sitting on evidence that could bring down a deputy city director and 3 connected organizations. Kalen leaned forward slowly. Where? Storage unit on Farron Street. Unit 41. The key is... Ezra reached up and unclasped a thin chain from around his neck. A small brass key hung from it. He had worn it so long the skin beneath it was slightly paler. He held it out. Kalen didn't take it immediately. He looked at Ezra's face. You carried this the whole time? Yes. Even knowing what it could cost you if someone found it? Yes. Why didn't you use it? Go to someone? A journalist, who? Ezra's voice stayed flat. Not angry, just honest. Greer owns pieces of 3 city departments and 2 district media outlets. I had no money, a fake theft charge, and no address. Nobody takes a meeting with that. He looked at the key. I kept it because someday it might matter to someone who had the standing to use it. The room was quiet. The pup made a small sound. Settled. Kalen took the key. He held it in his palm for a moment. Then he looked at Ezra with something that wasn't pity and wasn't admiration. It was something older than both of those things. Recognition, maybe, of what it costs to carry something heavy for a long time without letting it bend you all the way down. I should have looked for you sooner, Kalen said. Came out plain. No performance in it. Just a fact he had been sitting with since the alley on Delacroix Street. Ezra was quiet for a long moment. You didn't know I needed finding. No. Pause. But I should have looked anyway. Neither of them said anything after that for a while. The lamp stayed low. The pup slept. Outside, the city kept moving at its ordinary pace, entirely unaware that a key the size of a thumb was sitting in the palm of a man who now had both the evidence and the reach to make Aldous Greer's carefully constructed world come completely apart. Aldous Greer's office was on the 14th floor of a building that had his name on a plaque in the lobby. He was arrested on a Tuesday. No warning. No leak. No press conference arranged in advance. Just 4 federal investigators, documentation that had been quietly filed through a contact Kalen maintained at the district level, and a storage unit on Farron Street whose contents had been professionally cataloged over the previous 72 hours. The ledger copies were intact. Every page, every transfer, every name. Solange had cross-referenced them against 18 months of shell company records and produced a document so clean and complete that the federal contact had looked at it for 30 seconds and then looked at Kalen and said, simply, "Where did you get this?" Kalen had said, "From the person it was always meant to protect." The case moved fast after that. Greer's connections inside City Hall began making their own arrangements immediately. The particular scramble of people who understand that a ship is going down and want to be the first ones to hand over the life jackets in exchange for a deal. 2 district court clerks. 1 housing authority supervisor. The manager of a private security firm operating under the name Vantage Group. The Holofong leadership, exposed as financial partners in Greer's infrastructure scheme, lost 3 of their top men to federal charges inside a week. The organization didn't survive it. Ezra watched most of this from the Beaumont Street safehouse, pup in arms, on a laptop Kalen had left on the kitchen table without comment. He read the news updates, watched the press coverage, saw Greer's face on a screen for the first time. Composed, expensive suit, the look of a man who still believed his paperwork would save him. It wouldn't. He set the laptop aside. The pup was asleep against his chest. 6 days old. Already had opinions about being put down. Ezra had named him Arlo, a name he'd held privately for months, chosen on a night in a shelter when he had nothing else to do but imagine a future that felt impossible. Felt less impossible now. That was new. Unfamiliar in the way that good things become unfamiliar after long enough without them. He kept waiting for the catch. The condition. The hand that takes something back. Kalen knocked on the open door. He had started knocking. Ezra had noticed. Even though it was his house, his safe house, his everything, he knocked. "There's something I want to show you," Kalen said. He led Ezra to a room on the ground floor that Ezra hadn't been in before. It was empty, recently cleared out from the look of it. Fresh paint smell still present. Afternoon light coming through a wide window. "This building is going into a trust," Kalen said, "along with 2 others on this block. The plan is a housing program, specifically for Omegas without stable placement. Medical support, legal aid, employment referrals." He paused. "Solange is running the operational side. Philippa is handling the medical piece." Ezra looked around the empty room, looked back at Kalen. "When did you start planning this?" "The night Demarian told me protecting you might start a war." A slight pause. "I decided if that was the cost, then I needed to build something worth the cost." Ezra didn't know what to say. He almost said nothing. Then, "I'm thinking about leaving the city." He watched Kalen's face. It didn't change. Not in the way Ezra expected. No tightening. No move to argue. Just steady. Careful. The way someone looks when they're choosing their words, the way you choose steps on uncertain ground. "Okay," Kalen said. "Okay. Where are you thinking?" Ezra blinked. "You're not going to tell me to stay?" "No." Kalen looked at him directly. "You've had enough people decide things for you. I'm not adding to that list." Pause. "But I'd like to ask you something." Ezra waited. "Wherever you go," Kalen said quietly, "can I walk beside you instead of deciding for you?" The room stayed quiet. Arlo made a small sound against Ezra's chest. Ezra looked down at him, then back up. He didn't answer yet, but he didn't say no. 6 months later, the alley on Delacroix Street looked different in the morning light. Ezra stood at the entrance to it with Arlo strapped to his chest, one hand resting lightly on the baby's back, and looked at the space between the 2 buildings. The dumpsters were gone. The city had cleared the block as part of a district cleanup initiative, one of several quiet policy shifts that followed the Greer case. The asphalt was still cracked. The brick walls were still old. But someone had put a planter at the far end with something green growing in it, and the morning light hit the walls at an angle that made them look almost warm. Ezra had not planned to come here. He had been walking. Something he did most mornings now. Arlo buckled in, getting air, getting out of the apartment that was his actual apartment now, with his actual name on the lease in a building 3 blocks from the Beaumont Street program. He had not planned to end up here. But feet remember things. Kalen fell into step beside him without a word. He did that now. Showed up without announcement, without agenda. Sometimes with coffee, sometimes with nothing. Always at the right moment in a way that Ezra had stopped trying to explain and started simply accepting. They stood at the entrance to the alley together. Neither of them spoke for a while. Arlo grabbed Ezra's collar and held on with that complete and serious focus that babies bring to everything. Like gripping fabric is the most important task in the world. "He's going to be stubborn," Kalen said. "He already is. Runs in the family, I think." Ezra looked at him sideways. "Which family?" Kalen smiled. It was a small thing. Not performed. Not arranged. Just a real expression on a face that Ezra had spent weeks learning. The way that face looked when it was calculating, when it was worried, when it was trying not to show either. This one was different from all of those. This one was just present. "The first time we met," Ezra said, "you were hiding in a supply closet in a thunderstorm." "I was not hiding. I was strategically avoiding a situation." "You were hiding." Ezra looked back at the alley. "You were 15 and scared and you didn't know what to do next. And you kept apologizing for taking up space." He paused. "I remember that." Kalen was quiet. "I wasn't afraid of you," Ezra said. "Even then. You were just a person who needed somebody to be steady for a while." "You were steady," Kalen said. "I was 14 and tired and had absolutely nothing to offer." Ezra smiled at the far wall. The planter. The green thing growing in the cracked concrete. And somehow that was enough. They stood there a little longer. The city moved around them. Ordinary noise. Deliveries. A bus going past on the main street. Someone's music from a window above. All the regular sounds of a place that keeps going regardless. Kalen turned to look at him. "You saved my life that night," he said. In that shelter. You didn't know it. But you did. Ezra looked at him. This time, Kalen said. You gave me a reason to change it. Arlo made a sound. Not a cry. More like a comment. The specific noise of a 6-month-old who has decided that the two adults near him have been serious for long enough, and it is now time to redirect their attention. Ezra laughed. A real one. Not short, not careful. Just a laugh, full and unguarded. In a place that had once been the worst night of his life. The alley on Delacroix Street didn't belong to fear anymore. It belonged to this. A laugh. A baby's grip on a collar. Two people standing in morning light who had found each other twice across 11 years and decided, quietly, without ceremony, that the third time would be different. Not because the world had become easy, but because neither of them had to carry it alone anymore. That's where the story ends. Not with a battle. Not with a speech. Just two people in an alley that used to mean despair. And a baby who has no idea he was born into the middle of something that changed both of them. True strength isn't about who you defeat. It's about who you choose to protect, and who you let protect you back. If the story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment and tell us which chapter hit you the hardest, and why. Every comment you leave helps this channel reach someone else who needs a story like this one. Subscribe and turn on notifications. New stories come every week. Stories about compassion, about second chances, about people who chose mercy when the world expected something else. We'll see you in the next one.